So I feel, and I feel very good about the budget. The reason is that the budget is providing continuity. And that's what I've always said. How can you keep tweaking every now and then? And imagine that the investment, which is generally 7 to 10 years of gestation period, should flow in regularly when you will keep tweaking the fiscal policy every year. How will that happen? So this is the first time I find that continuity happening here. You can easily see the flow of things happening from 2014-15 till today. And if you are a visionary and if you are a policymaker, you can anticipate, okay, this is what will come now. So that is something I like. The other thing I like is the strength with which the FM, or call the PMO, or whosoever, the government has worked. Now, let me bring this to your notice that in the midst of pandemic, everybody used to ridicule India. And I'm used to ridicule because if I have time, I'll share that with you, how the world used to ridicule us when derivatives were introduced and we did not, and how did the world ridicule us when the mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities were being used in America as modern financial instruments, innovated, right? And we did not. And how even our governor, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, was ridiculed for not understanding what these sophisticated products are and depriving India of them. So I'm used to ridicule because I've been in the RBI. But in COVID, the ridicule was high. Look at America, 20% of the budget. Look at the way they're pouring money, they're sustaining the economy. And here, India, we stood our ground. We are a poor country, whatever said and done. And we have limited resources, whatever said and done. How are our resources used? Laser beamed. The food, we had a huge stock of food grains, and that huge stock of food grains was so intelligently used, laser beam, to help the poor. So much so that later on, Bhasin, Bhalla, and Virmani came out with a study at the IMF working paper saying that they were able to sustain and not let people fall below the poverty line. The health part has yet not been captured, quantified. I'm trying to do that, but I'm finding it a challenge. Nevertheless, that attempt. Secondly, when it came to health, free vaccinations, innovation on the vaccination, resources provided to the people who can manufacture the pharmas and the vaccination produced, not only within the country, even exported. Health facilities opened even in private hospitals to the poor people. How will you quantify that? Nobody will quantify. The third thing, remember just about 2 years back, the Prime Minister came and said, look, don't lay off people. It's a difficult time. And people, many friends in the industry told me, and I was a member of the SHM at that time, heading their banking vertical. Many people told, because the Prime Minister has said, we are not laying them off, but some have accepted 50% salary cut because they didn't come to office. And some have even accepted 80% salary cut, but they're staying with us. And I have a friend in Bombay who told me in Bombay, there are people who have accepted 100% salary cut on the condition when we resume office, we'll be on priority to join. That is how India took care of its people. Unlike the Western world, where people just were laid off and the government had to intervene by providing unemployment allowance. Now, if you look at unemployment allowance, there was very large. But in India, we took care through a different strategy and we survived and we did so well. Why do I say we survived? Look at the consequences of that reckless fiscal policy that they adopted. Liquidity was in the system, massive. And when Ukraine-Russia war took place, it was like a trigger that happened, just a matchstick shown, inflation zoomed. Now, our India's 30-year average of inflation is around 6%. In America, is 2%. Our Russia-Ukraine war post-period, inflation touched 8%, 7%, 6%. The upper side of our inflation target, 4 plus 2 minus 2, is around 6. We are hovering around that. America's 30-year average is 2. Euro is less than 2. England is less than 2. And what was the inflation in those countries? 10%, 8.2, 9, 5 times more. Just to understand, imagine inflation in India is 30%. How would we react? Right? And look at those countries, because they had mismanaged their economy, all this was happening because we had not mismanaged our economy. And I tell you, the credit goes to the policymakers, credit goes to the government and the bureaucrats and academicians who are associated with the government, who guided the government. And I must also share one secret with you. I was in Delhi at that time, and I told a couple of friends that in the ministry, look, if a person is running 104 temperature, you have to give him 2 crocins. Then they came back to me that here is an answer from the right person. We will give 2 crocins, we will not give one, we will not give three. Appropriate dosage for the right tenure and duration. Unlike the Western world, which threw money ridiculing us. Now, this is not new. The Western world has done this for long. If you remember 2003, they started with the subprime, and then they started lending recklessly, and they called it as financial innovation. And 2008 Lehman Brothers happened. Again, reckless, unconventional monetary policy. Reckless, accommodating. So much so that the balance sheet of the central banks in those countries doubled. And then it went nearly 4 times. Unconventional monetary policy. They're not stopping it. In COVID, from 0 in 2008, or say 1 in 2008, to 4 in 2012, that is the global financial crisis, it was hovering there, and 2020 to 2022, it doubled. The balance sheet in USA, Euro, England, broadly, not in India. Very careful, very careful. So what was the consequence? Our inflation continued to be under control. Our gross fiscal deficit, I'll come to the gross fiscal deficit a minute later. So the continuity that came with the new government, initially when they came in, they spoke about the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. They revisited it. And they said, we have to follow the targets. Then they had a glide path. Then we had the COVID. There's never a day of rest for them. But during COVID, as I gave you the example of crocin and 104 fever, very careful, very cautious, very, very adequate, appropriate laser beamed measures to save people and lives. But a glide path is there in the mind. We have to go for fiscal consolidation. In the midst, and I want to repeat it, in the midst of the crisis, this government said, we will give you support, but which will be long term. Right now, medium and long term. Right now, Manrega shot up. Medium to long term, capital expenditure started increasing. Can you imagine in the midst of a crisis, somebody is increasing capital expenditure? That's the vision. And this year, the capital expenditure expansion continues and substantial. That means the multiplier effect is there. That means the intergenerational transfer is taking place of growth and employment. That means not only today, this crisis, which can come in different waves, 5 generally, if you follow the Spanish flu of 1918, this crisis can continue till 2027 for the Western world. 23 is almost washed out. 23, 24 could be recessionary in the Western world. But in our country, the vision is there and capital expenditure. First, continuity. Second, the gross fiscal deficit, the glide path for that, which was determined, that is still within the reach and is being discussed in the midst of global crisis. You see, if there was anybody with a weak knee or a weak heart, would have said, our exports are going to get impacted. Russia-Ukraine war, supply side is totally devastated. How can I follow the consolidation path, glide path, which was decided before all this happened? No. but here is a strong steel reserve. And they say we follow the glide path. And not only say, what have they done? They said we are reducing the gross fiscal deficit from 6.4 to 5.9. And may I tell you, they have very conservatively estimated nominal growth rate at 10.5%, which according to me is conservative, or at least low by 1%, if not by 200 basis point, 2%. Because if your inflation is going to be around 5-6%, which is a 30-year average, and your growth is expected, real growth is expected to be 6.57, then your nominal growth rate for GDP should easily be 12.5. Certainly 11.5. They have estimated 10.5. Now just imagine if the economy grows at 12.5%, the GST collection, the income tax, corporation, all those taxes are going to increase. And therefore, the gross fiscal deficit, which has been technically shown as reducing by only 50 basis points from 6.4 to 5.9, could reduce much faster. Or at least they will have space for putting money more in places that probably will come up and need to be put. The second thing, very conservative GDP estimate. The second thing, if you look at the correction which has been shown in the budget, on revenue deficit, the correction is the maximum, 4.1 to 2.9. That shows that the quality of adjustment is simply pristine. That's all we all economists have said. When you borrow, the borrowing should go for capital expenditure. And here, in the midst of a crisis, and this is the last full-time, full-year budget before the election, this could have been used for any purpose, fully justified. Me, you, other economists, public policy experts would have said, you have to understand they have a compulsion, but nothing doing. The adjustment is on the revenue account. And that is where I say it needs courage to do such a thing. And that's what provides continuity. So the government, unlike, and as economists, we all know that the political cycles very quickly start getting reflected in budgetary cycles. But here, the government, with the confidence with which they are conducting and the responsibility with which they are conducting fiscal policy is really appreciated. Even in the Western world, who had the resources, they have been reckless. In our country, they have been far more responsible, and accountable behavior is there. That provides the continuity to me. Now, obviously, my own overall thought is that the budget has provided continuity. Now, as economists, what are we really chasing? What are we really worried about? We are all worried about growth. While we want to grow on a personal level, we also want that the nation should grow and our students should get employment as they come out of their universities, and there should be vibrant economy everywhere. That's what we economists and we public policy experts want. Is this budget growth oriented? So first point I've already made, capital expenditure. It is growth oriented. Second, in a country which is enjoying demographic dividend, and please remember, demographic dividend is not for all times to come. There are estimates which have been made that the demographic dividend would be available to India till about 2046. We have to use it by that time. Otherwise, it continuously becomes a disaster and it could become a demographic deficit for us. Now, if we are going to tap demographic dividend, what are the two places which are our reservoirs? Our first reservoir is the youth. Problem is that if you do not engage youth in a productive way, what will youth do? It has to stay engaged. It has a sharp mind. It has young muscles and legs and arms. It'll either shift to weapons or to drugs. Both the examples are there in our country. Punjab is in the grip of drugs, and Chhattisgarh and those areas are in the grip of Naxal movements. You have to keep the youth engaged. Therefore, I say don't give them dole. Give them an employment opportunity. Keep them engaged. The mind and body should be engaged. The youth should get tired by evening in mind and body and should just go in a slump. That's exactly what the government is doing. It is giving them opportunity after opportunity to stay engaged in some way or the other. Now, where is our youth? Partly our youth is in rural areas and partly in urban areas. So in rural areas, they have come out now with fabulous schemes. You must have heard. Have you heard of an agriculture accelerator? I think it's a great idea. They're thinking in terms of, okay, there are hubs, there are incubators, but we need an agriculture accelerator fund to encourage agri startups. What more can you ask for? Secondly, they're saying they want to now push millets. Opens up very new opportunities. Just 5 years back, did you ever know that millets was something, a buzzword we can tap? We are short of water. Our Punjab and Haryana soil is totally deprived and bad because of the intense fertilizers that have been used. Now the government is coming out with a brand new innovative idea in the last few years about millets, and that continuity is there. They've also started thinking in terms of fisheries and encouraging it. And therefore, when I look at this whole story of agriculture, and I think, okay, the youth is there, they are going to tap agriculture, improve. Other things are there, which are there in the budget, which I think is, they've spoken about cluster-based and value chain approach in public-private partnership. And they've also spoken about collaboration between farmer, state, and industry for input supplies, extension services, market linkages. All that is there, traditional. But the two innovative ideas that I looked at and I found them very, very good. And of course, I told you about fisheries. I thought that was a great idea that they're bringing in. The second thing, for me, skilling is important. So they're bringing in Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, that each one is able to engage himself and work. And then they've come out with a national apprenticeship promotion scheme, and then the Skill India digital platform. So the youth are going to be engaged, and I have a feeling you and me work with youth. You and me work in the university environment. You and me, Kalyan, you have been at IIM Bangalore, now you are at IIM Visakhapatnam. You know the youth, on an average, is brilliant. Be it in IIM Bangalore, be it in Visakhapatnam. They are brilliant, their minds are brilliant, they're restless. And if you are able to engage them across the country, if they join the workforce in a productive way, can anybody stop India from growing at 8%? Next thing, female. Now, this is a tragedy of our country, that we have literate female, we have hardworking females, but we do not have their hard work captured in GDP. Now, tell me a female who's sitting idle here, but in the GDP, when it comes, we don't value it. And in the workforce, labor force, female labor force participation, our figures for female labor force participation is the lowest in the world. It is worse than many countries which do not let their women go out of the house. But in the neighboring countries, against the global average of about 60% female labor force participation, in the neighboring countries as high as 80%. So in the Southeast culture, where we are contextually located, it's not that if we give opportunity to our women, they will not work. As it is, it's not true that women don't work. They're already working in the field. Only thing is they're not accounted for. So now, as I look at it, the women are being brought into the system. So how do you grow? You grow with labor and capital. On the labor aspect, youth is being tapped. Women are going to be tapped through these self-help groups. Now, as you know, and somebody just read it, I was a member of the board of NABARD Financial Services, which is working at the grassroots level. I've gone and visited self-help groups myself, microcredit activities I've done myself, visiting fields. Women have great potential and they're far more financially responsible than we men. And if you're able to engage them through self-help groups, you've done a revolutionary work. And other thing is the Mahila Saman Savings Certificate, which is being discussed. I'm excited about it. You look, the Jan Dhan Yojana tried to bring in women into the financial sector, but despite that, because our culture and ethos, whenever a male uh, business correspondent goes to the village household, generally the man intervenes. And therefore, the women is still not allowed to have an interface with the male business. If there's a female business correspondent, it's okay, but not with the male. But most of them are men. Now, moment the man intervenes, the empowerment of the women is lost because the password is being used by the male counterpart and the money is being held in the hands of the male counterpart. Again, it gets misutilized. But somebody is thinking in the country about encouraging women to economically get engaged. And I really like the Mahila Saman thing. Then comes, which is the other labor force which is underutilized, tribals. So if you want to grow, you need labor and capital. On the labor, you are tapping the youth, you are tapping women, and now you're going to tap the tribals. So special schemes have been talked about tribals. And they have, I'm excited about this idea. We have all heard about World Trade Center. In major commercial cities of the world, World Trade Center is there. Local industrial products, you come and meet them. It is there in Bombay, it is there in Delhi, it was there in New York. Now they're going to have a unity mall for the artisans. Maximum. Right? So what I'm saying is they are going to bring in, tap the vulnerable tribal groups. There's going to be a development mission for them. They're going to be brought in, engaged, trained, and their products brought into the unity mall. So then the issue is that if they are able to tap these segments of the population, which augment the labor force, we have gained a lot. Now, final point in growth comes to finance. You need labor and capital to grow. And what have they done on finance? Many things, starting from hitting the ground running with the Jan Dhan Yojana in the very first few months, of his taking over, the Prime Minister has pushed the financial sector to grow and provide oxygen to the rest of the economy to make it comfortable for them to grow. So now what have they done in that? They have brought in, firstly, the concept of a national financial information registry. So database is going to get created and flow of credit, promote financial inclusion, foster financial stability will become automatic because there'll be this registry. The second, the green financing is being discussed now in a big way. There's going to be green credit that is being discussed. I'm also thrilled with the idea of shifting to organic farming and natural farming. Having suffered the consequences of intensive use of chemicals, NPK, in Haryana and Punjab, soil totally desertified, soil life totally destroyed. Even if they want in Punjab to go back to their earlier life of multiple cropping, they cannot because the soil is dead and gone. So taking steps within the time of going for natural fertilizers, avoiding chemical fertilizers, I think something appreciable, and going for green credit. So to me, the budget is, to sum up, providing continuity, which is important for a fiscal policy, is growth oriented because it's providing support to the vulnerable sections which were not actively engaged or needed to be brought in actively into the workforce, providing support in finance. The final point I'm making is, and which I've already made, I'm just now highlighting, is that capital expenditure is futuristic. And therefore, I say this budget is growth oriented, futuristic, and providing continuity with the past. Thank you for your time and attention.